My name is Ramez Naam. I'm the co-chair of Energy and Environment at Singularity. You might have heard a little bit about me. I don't come from the energy sector. I come from tech. I cut my teeth at this company, Microsoft, where I spent 13 years, got to work closely with Bill Gates and Satya Nadella. And since then, I've moved into other things, writing science fiction novels and happening to work in the energy sector. And now, among other things, I'm an investor in early-stage energy startups. I'm on the board of this organization, E8. Carbon is the eighth element, where we've invested in a wide variety of clean energy and sustainability companies. And I'll talk to you at the end of this about how you can join in on that if you'd like. Now, I'm talking today about energy disruption. And disruption is a big word we just toss about willy-nilly. Well, what does disruption actually look like in a sector like energy? This is disruption. This is Peabody Coal. Peabody Coal in 2012 was the largest publicly traded coal company in the world. In 2015, they were bankrupt. And it wasn't just Peabody. Arch, Pioneer, Midland, 8 of the world's largest coal companies all went bankrupt in a 24-month period. The Stowe index of publicly traded coal company stocks dropped 90% before bouncing back to be only 75% down. Right? Not a good place to be. And that disruption is all economic. This happened to these companies because the worldwide consumption of coal, the worldwide demand for coal, peaked in 2013. After rising for 150 years since the Industrial Revolution and James Watt's steam engine, 2013, we stopped using more and started using less. It's up about 1% in 2017, but it's still down from its highs, and it will continue to drop over time. Now, energy is a fungible resource. People will use the cheapest energy they can buy. So this is happening because there's cheaper alternatives. Now, today, in most parts of the world, you can build a new coal-fired power plant or natural gas power plant for a cost of about 6 cents per kilowatt hour. I'll come back to that number again and again, because to disrupt something, you have to come in below this price. So what's happening there? Well, here's what's happening. Clean energy, it has been around for a long time, but it used to be completely non-competitive. In 1980, the cost of a new wind power contract in the US was 10 times the cost of a coal power plant contract, 60 cents. Today, you can sign a wind power contract in the center of the US for about 2 cents. Remove all subsidies, about 4 cents. It's a 15 times price decline in that 30-odd year period of time. That's an exponential. And so on every continent around the world, who here is from Europe? Who here is from North America? Who here is from Latin America? Who here is from Asia? Who here is from Africa? Who here is from Australia or New Zealand? On every one of those continents, there's some area of bright red where there are incredibly fast winds that are usually fairly steady throughout the year. And in those areas, the cost is just ridiculous. Morocco, these are all prices in the last 12 months. Morocco, unsubsidized, 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour, half the price of coal or gas power. Brazil, just a few months ago, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Mexico, last December, after a few rounds of energy reform and moving to open auctions, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Right? Every country around the world, the price of wind power is plunging, and that red dashed line is the price of coal or gas electricity. In fact, it's quite optimistic for them, but you just see the cost of wind power plunging. Now, the fastest winds on planet Earth actually aren't on land, they're offshore, but it's been hellaciously expensive to build offshore, but that has changed too. I thought offshore wind would never make economic sense. Even 3 years ago, I thought that. I was wrong. 2 weeks ago, we had this deal signed in the US. This is the first large-scale offshore wind project in the US ever, signed at 6.5 cents kilowatt hour, 9 cents without subsidies. Still more expensive than coal or gas, but this is the first one. It's just going to get cheaper. The developer just said this is simply the cheapest power we could buy. If you go look in Europe, last summer we had 3 different deals in the German market with 2 different developers signed at 0 subsidy, just coming in at wholesale prices for completion of the projects by 2021. So it's a 4 times price decline in 9 years for offshore wind. So wind power is an exponential technology, and it's going to keep getting cheaper. Those are not endpoint prices. The price should drop roughly in half again, given what we see of the learning rate, how much it drops with new scale. But solar power makes wind power look slow and stagnant. Look at the cost of a watt of a solar module. In 1977, it cost $77 for 1 watt of solar panel. Today, it's 30 cents. That's a 250 times price reduction. This is physical infrastructure. This is the most important raw commodity there is, energy. And this is not the pace at which roads get cheaper or buildings get cheaper or factories get cheaper. This is like a digital transformation in the most important physical asset there is. And so now we have crossover, where in the sunniest parts of the world, solar is just the cheapest power you can buy, unsubsidized, period. Okay? Again, economics. 6 cents to build new coal or gas. What do we see elsewhere in the world? India. India is the country that after China peaked in coal consumption, people thought, okay, India will keep going up. India has very low energy per capita. We'll keep building new coal power plants in India, right? No. Last year, we had 2 deals in India that came in substantially below the cost of building new coal. New coal in India, 3.1 rupees. We had deals come in at 2.4 rupees, 3.8 cents for solar projects in India. The cost of new solar contracts in India has dropped by a factor of 4 in just 4 years. What about here in the US? Tucson, Arizona, about 2 months ago, we had a contract signed at 2.3 cents. Back out the subsidies, 3.3 cents. Half the cost of coal or gas. In Colorado, we had a deal signed in the US, unsubsidized, about 3.9 cents, a third cheaper than coal or gas. Not in the Southwest, in Colorado. The cost of 20-year power contracts for solar in the US has dropped by a factor of 8 in the last decade. Mexico, less than 2.5 cents. Abu Dhabi, 18 months ago, this was the world record, 2.4 cents. I love this particular photo. But that record held for a while, but it was beaten early this year in Chile, 2.15 cents in the Atacama Desert, unsubsidized, 1/3 of the cost of coal or gas electricity, and still dropping. Every country around the world, the cost of solar power is dropping, and driven by both policy and these radical economics, the scale of solar has expanded by a factor of 50 in the last decade. Still only 2% of world electricity, but it took 25 years to get to 1%, and then it took about 2.5 years to get to 2%. That's the pace. And so, around the world, any of these areas in red or orange, solar will simply be cheaper, or is cheaper now. And even in some places you wouldn't expect. Where did solar get started, really? Germany. Yes, thank you very much. How sunny is Germany? It's not. But the German people wanted to be clean. They started solar, and that started the exponential cycle going. That started the scaling of the industry that brought down the prices. So thank you, German people. Well, now Germany has moved to an auction model, the best practice. And so 2 months ago, we had an auction in the south of Germany, and solar came in at 4 euro cents per kilowatt hour in a place less sunny than most of Canada. That is the disruption that's happening worldwide. And these are not endpoint prices either. The cost of solar should drop by a factor of 3 over the coming 15, 20 years. This is just disruption in the making. Now put solar and wind together, they're roughly countercyclical. Solar during the day, more wind at night. Solar more in the summer, wind more in the winter. You can get 70% of your electricity if you build a continent-sized grid to integrate those. But to go beyond that, to go to 80, 90, 95%, we have to crack this nut. And storage is now the most exciting area in clean energy, I think. You all know who this is? Tony Stark? Elon occasionally acts like Tony Stark, for good and ill. But the reason that Tesla is able to announce the Tesla Powerwall battery 2 years ago wasn't one sudden breakthrough that Elon had. It was that lithium-ion batteries are also an exponential technology. They've been dropping in price since 1990 steadily. In fact, since just 2010, the price of lithium-ion batteries has dropped by 80%, a factor of 5. 2010 felt like yesterday, right? And the forecasters have just blown it. The forecasters in the energy space just don't ever get it right. Let me show you. In the US, the Department of Energy has the EIA, and those forecasts of energy. And here's the EIA's forecasts from 2013 or so. They said, look, battery prices is going to be amazing. We're going to see the cost of batteries drop by 1/3 over the next 30 years. Here's what actually happened, right? Forecasters have status quo bias. They expect the future to look like the present, and in so many ways it does, but not when it comes to technology. So bet on the innovators in this space, not on the forecasters. And we know, by the way, that we can see the price of lithium-ion batteries falls at almost identically the pace of the price of solar. They both get cheaper by 20-25% per doubling of scale. It's just that batteries are where solar was 10 years ago. They're still quite expensive. Let me be honest about that, but they are plunging in price. And that's just one technology. Behind lithium-ion batteries, there's a dozen more energy storage technologies. This is a company called ESS, one of my portfolio companies. They're an all-iron flow battery company. A lithium-ion battery is good for maybe 1,000 cycles. That's why your phone starts to suck after a couple years. This battery is good for 20,000 cycles. This is not a 2-year, 3-year asset. This is a 30-year asset. You build on the grid scale or build like a building and leave it running, and that lowers the levelized cost per unit radically, and you should see them selling these at prices similar to lithium-ion in the very near future. So energy storage will keep plunging in price too. So in this sector, I keep saying cheaper, right? We never thought that. But this is a sector where technology is both disruptive and deceptive, right? Where we had that period of deception in clean energy. People thought it would never get good. Let me show you. This is the IEA, the International Energy Agency, the world's experts on energy. And the IEA is not what I would call an exponential organization. Allow me to demonstrate that. Here's the IEA's forecasts for the growth of solar over the last 16 years. Start from the bottom. This is the World Energy Outlook, WEO 2002. They said it's going to be amazing. We'll have 50 gigawatts of solar around the world by 2030. We have 450 gigawatts of solar today. 2004, they said, OK, our forecast is a little low, we're going to lift it. 2006, they said, well, our forecast was a little bit low, we're going to lift it. 2007, we're going to lift it. 2008, 2010, 2011. Every single year in the history of its existence, the IEA has lifted its solar forecasts, right? It's like some analyst is looking at their spreadsheet and going to the formula, hitting Control-C, Control-V for the next row, right? But they still think linearly. They think the growth will be a linear line when, in fact, what's happening is an exponential. Here's something better. This is AllianceBernstein, private equity firm in New York. They did not a forecast, but a retrospective. How have the prices of energy changed over time? So across the bottom of this chart, they have the cost of oil, coal, and gas over a 70-year period. And then what's that on the upper right, that gray line? I think maybe somebody's kid took a crayon and scrawled on their parents' report, something like that. That's the cost of solar, and the cost of wind, and the cost of batteries. That is what disruption looks like. That starts to look like a Kodak moment for the energy industry, right? Now, I want to be clear, energy is not like digital. We build these assets for decades. This is a race, and it will take decades and decades to make this transition happen, under the best circumstances. But we see it happening now. Last year, China canceled construction of more than 150 planned coal power plants. 40 of them had already started construction. At least $10 or $20 billion just written off. Right? India, in 1 month last year, canceled 14 gigawatts, $8.9 billion US dollars of planned coal investment. Because, as the energy minister said, the price of solar is, quote, in free fall. Why would we build coal now? Now most has been comparing the cost of building a new coal plant to a new solar plant, right? But something even crazier is starting to happen. In November of last year, the CEO of NextEra, which is a large utility in the US, operates Florida Power and Light, said something that Will alluded to earlier, something insane. He said, look, by the early 2020s, it will be cheaper for us to build new solar or wind than to keep our current coal plants running. That's disruption. Those become stranded assets, hundreds of billions of dollars of assets that are just no longer economically viable, right? As Carbon Tracker did the math, they said, look, here's the OPEX of coal in the US, and here's the cost of new solar in the US. Right. Now, because of where we are and the times and so on, when I talk about this, I do get asked a lot about this guy. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not like Trump has had no impact on the energy industry, but it's pretty close, actually. For example, in the first 8 weeks of the Trump presidency, the US shut down more coal plants than in Barack Obama's first 4-year term. Because Donald Trump is only the president of the United States. He's not the king, he's not the emperor, and he can't change the laws of economics. And the laws of economics say, with the pace of innovation that we see in solar and wind, they are simply undercutting what's happening in coal, and that isn't going to change. All right, all of that's about electricity. But there's this other way that we use energy. We use energy to move stuff, to move us, to move our products, to move our families, and overwhelmingly we use oil for that. And oil is a very special commodity. It's the #1 commodity worldwide, reaching $2 trillion in valuation in some years, and it's also incredibly volatile. 2% oversupply, if the demand drops by 2 million barrels a day, can send the price crashing to $30 a barrel or even less. 2 million barrels a day, too little supply, can send this price skyrocketing to $150 a barrel. And those skyrocketing oil prices almost always produce a recession. Right? So this matters quite a lot. Now, if it was 10 years ago when we were talking about oil, we would probably be talking about peak oil. Peak oil supply. The problem was we couldn't get enough oil out of the ground. Demand was going to keep going up. The price was going to be $200 a barrel, $300 a barrel. Well, it turns out that a high price does create incentives for innovation, for exploration, for more drilling, and so on. So that didn't happen. Now, what's really facing this industry is peak oil demand. Right? Remember, coal consumption peaked in 2013. Oil will be the next of those fuels to peak in demand. And I'm not the first to see this. In fact, the Saudi oil minister during the OPEC crisis of the 70s, Sheikh Ahmed Yamani, he saw this. And in 2000, he said this to his fellow sheikhs. He said, guys, the Stone Age didn't end for a lack of stone. Right? And the oil age is going to end with oil still in the ground. The Stone Age ended why? We made bronze. Bronze was flexible, it was light, you could make it really sharp, you could fix it, you could do cool things. And so those rocks became not very important. And Yamani is warning his fellow sheikhs, don't bet on this market lasting forever. The world will invent better technology to move stuff than black tar. And he was right. It's not one technology, though. It's actually the interaction of 3 separate things that are happening. A shift to transport on demand as a service, autonomy of transport, and electrification, because those 3 together are far bigger and far more explosive than any of them on their end. Let me show you. Transport as a service. This is already a blockbuster. Taxis peaked in the US at about 1.4 billion rides per year. Uber, Lyft, and their comrades this year will do 3 times that. They've lowered the price, and they've made it more convenient. They didn't cannibalize taxis so much as they created an entirely new sector, right? And in that sector, we don't care about the upfront cost of the car or how much range it has. We care about the cost per mile. And in fact, one reason Uber and Lyft is so successful is because the cost per mile in an Uber or Lyft is about half the cost of a taxi. It's also much more convenient, safer, ratings and reviews, all of that stuff. So this is a very important trend that provides a baseline for everything else. The number 2 is autonomy, which will accelerate transport as a service, as I'll show you. And autonomy is something that we've been very uncertain. How soon would it come? How soon will we get this? Well, we're about to get it. It's coming very, very, very soon. And there's really just 3 companies that are in the lead, and everybody else is in the dust. Google, with its subsidiary Waymo, driven 8 million miles now. GM paid $1 billion for this startup, Cruise, driven about 5 million miles now, mostly here in San Francisco, and Tesla, who's the wild card, long shot outsider. Okay? So why do I say these are the companies? Because we have data. Here in California, if you test an autonomous vehicle, you have to tell the state some things. You have to tell them how many miles did you drive, and you tell them how many times did a human have to take control. And those human take controls, they're not emergencies. Overwhelmingly, they're the car gets into a situation it doesn't understand, and it pauses, and it says, should I pass this guy into oncoming traffic or not? I'm just going to wait here. You tell me what to do. Right? They're relatively safe. And you have to get to probably about one disengagement per 50,000 miles, maybe for 100,000 miles. If you get to that point, you have an autonomous taxi fleet. Okay? So how are we doing? Well, here's data through just the end of 2017. So this is 9 months out of date. First half, second half are the blue and the orange. Waymo in the second half drove 7,500 miles per human disengagement. Again, the bar is 50,000 to 100,000. Cruise, distant number 2, drove almost 3,000. Nobody else is on the playing field. They could catch up in a few years, but nobody else is there. It's Google/Waymo and GM/Cruise. Now, that's breaking it out into halves of the year. How's the trend? In November, Waymo drove 30,000 miles between disengagements. That's 9 months ago. They could be at that 50,000-mile bar today. And in fact, that would be consistent with other things that we see. Because in Arizona, which is the most permissive state in the US, Waymo in March started offering rides to a few hundred beta testers with no safety driver. You're in their beta program, you use the app, a vehicle shows up, you get in, and there's no human there at all. They've ordered 62,000, Waymo ordered earlier this year, 62,000 of these Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid vehicles and 20,000 Jaguar all-electric vehicles because they said at Google I/O this year they are launching commercial, full autonomous robotaxi fleet in Arizona before the end of this year. And I believe them. They might miss it by a few months. Maybe they'll be 6 months late. I don't know. But the numbers on their accuracy say that's plausible. GM, meanwhile, has applied to the US Department of Transportation for an exemption to the law so it can, in 2019, put out a fleet of these modified Chevy Volts, so all electric, that have no wheels, like no steering wheel and no pedals. And they say they've reaffirmed this about a month ago, that they are launching an autonomous robotaxi service, probably in San Francisco, next year, 2019. Now, these guys, Waymo's driven 8 million miles, driving about 1 million miles a day. Cruise, about 5 million miles. The only company that has a shot at dethroning them is this company, Tesla. Because Tesla, in autopilot mode, has driven 1.6 billion miles. Not million, billion miles. And Tesla, this is a video that Tesla has on their website of new software that they say they are auto-releasing to recent year Model S's in the next 4 weeks. Tesla has confirmed, or said repeatedly, in the next 4 weeks, they are going to enable full autonomy, punch in an address and go, for anyone with Autopilot V2 hardware, which is the last 2 or 3 years of Model S's and Model 3s, and a big new hardware update for free for those owners that gives them 10 times the processing power in the next 6 to 9 months. So those are the 3 companies. And I used to wonder, maybe the 2030, I don't know. I've convinced myself the next 12 to 24 months, this is real. Okay, what does that have to do with oil, right? Because like some of these cars will be gasoline. Well, here's what it has to do with oil and with transport as a service. In an Uber, this is McKinsey data, half the cost of an Uber is the driver. A taxi is $3.50 a mile, Uber is $1.50. An autonomous Uber could be 75 cents a mile, which is about what a personal vehicle ownership costs. Okay, that's good. Still doesn't tell me about oil, right? But what's even more important is that almost all of these will be electric, because electric will be the cheapest on a per mile basis, period, right? We've seen this incredible price plunge. Tesla Roadster, $250,000. Model S, $80,000. Model 3, $35,000, right? And even if Tesla goes out of business, GM says the future is all electric. Nissan has more and more Leafs and variants. VW spent $25 billion on batteries for its next generation of EVs. Every manufacturer is going after this. And electric vehicles, still just a tiny fraction, 3 million vehicles out of 1 billion total, but doubling every 18 months or so. It took 20 years to sell the first million electric vehicles, 18 months to sell the second million, 8 months to sell a third million, right? And again, the forecasters. Oh my God, the forecasters. Here's the US EIA again. 2015. How many electric vehicles with a 200-mile range, the red line, would we have by 2040? You might not be able to see that line. It's so low. They said 20,000. Tesla took 500,000 pre-orders for the Model 3, right? They just don't get it. It's, again, status quo bias. What's happened? That's a 2015 forecast. What's happened recently in forecasts? Well, here's forecasts from a bunch of people. BP, Exxon, OPEC, IEA, and they're all different, same colors, right, over time. In the last 3 years, all of these organizations have lifted their forecasts like this. OPEC multiplied their forecast by a factor of 5 over the last 2 years. And they still don't get it, I would say, because they're still thinking about this in terms of individual ownership, people buying vehicles. But while that's still going to be a real market for decades, people will still own vehicles, that's not the growth. That's not the real thing. The real thing is paying for rides by the mile. And electric vehicles are already today, not tomorrow, not 2025, 2015. They're cheaper per mile. Here's a study that came out looking at 2015 vehicle costs per mile over a 4-year period. Here's the gasoline vehicle. See the cost of the vehicle in blue and the cost of the fuel. Okay, here's the electric vehicle. Here's the cost of the vehicle, and there's that cost of electricity is that tiny little gray sliver, right? And that's what the 2015 cost of an electric vehicle. Those costs, that capital cost, that blue area, is plunging as well, right? Let me show you. This is the entire engine and drivetrain of an electric vehicle. This is the engine and drivetrain of a gasoline vehicle. The only reason this is more expensive is because batteries have been expensive. Okay, that's plunging. And because they're made at low scale. When they're made at similar volume, that will be much cheaper than that. If you don't believe me, ask Ford. Here's what Ford said in 2017. They said, look, when we look at electric vehicles, what we see happening is this. In terms of cost, we think the final assembly area in our factories will be half as much for an electric vehicle. We think the CapEx per 1,000 vehicles produced by a factory will be half as much. And we think the labor cost per vehicle will be a third as much. In fact, on the drivetrain, it's more like the labor cost is 80% lower, right? So put those together, and you're talking about, if a taxi is $3.50 a mile, you're talking about an autonomous electric robotaxi at 35 cents a mile. Half the cost of a personal vehicle, close to the cost of taking the bus. And then if you make it shared, like the local motors Ollie, or this vehicle in Copenhagen, or the next future pods in Dubai, you can take 6, 8 people, you can cut the cost by a factor of 2 or 3 again, and you got 15 cents or 10 cents a mile, and that's cheaper than taking the bus. On demand, to you, or within a block or two of you. So what does that do to oil? Well, here's the IEA's forecast for oil. This is actually at Bloomberg's side. Bloomberg said, OK, we're going to modify it. Bloomberg says oil could peak in 2020. I think that's too optimistic, but then I think they're slow on the back end. Here's a more radical forecast. There's a company called ARK Invest, and they really nailed this point of vehicles going electric is different than miles going electric. And miles is the more important thing. And what they say is even if electric vehicles are only 10% of the vehicles in 2025, they could be half the miles driven. And that looks like peak oil demand in 2023, and then not a plateau, but a cliff. The majors in oil all say by 2030, we'll see oil demand peak. All of these large European oil majors. So 4 pieces of advice for you. What can you do? How can you take action? The first one is quite technical, and it is this. Cover your ass. Because you don't, like the oil price is high right now, it's great, right? But you don't want to catch a falling knife. So if you're exposed to oil or vehicle factory parts or whatever, coal, just be careful. Like diversify, think about your investments. 2, go where the energy is cheapest. If you do manufacturing, find a place that has good sun and good wind because it will be cheapest there. And think about flexibility by time because the cost will vary more by time. 3, invest in the future. We're talking about hundreds of billions globally spent on clean energy and transport in the next, every year for the next 20 years. And if you want to know what I invest in, I syndicate all of my investments on the AngelList platform, so any of you can invest alongside me in the same startups that I invest in. And 4, If you are in the energy business, if you are in the transport business, if you are in the public transit business, if you are in the car parts manufacturing business, if you are from a country that depends on the export of coal or gas or oil or vehicle parts as a big part of your economy, the disruption is going to happen. And you have only one shot, really. You cannot wait to be disrupted. You have to go to the disruption yourself. You have to disrupt yourself to get a piece of the new thing. Thank you all very much.